Good afternoon, everybody. This is Darius Assemi, publisher of GB Wire and president of Granville Homes. This afternoon, I have with me Supervisor Steve Brandau. Welcome, Supervisor. And Council Member Mike Karbassi of City of Fresno. Welcome, Council Member. Today's panel discussion is mainly about the local economy. How do we roll out, get back into the workforce? What have the impacts been so far? How damaged has the local economy become? What does the revenue stream look like for the County of Fresno and for the City of Fresno? And let me just start with just a few stats that most of you have seen. So California, there's almost 3 million people in the last few weeks that have applied for unemployment. And that roughly comes to, that's out of the 19 million people that are in the workforce in California. So if you do a simple math, and the chart should be up on your screen momentarily, we're close to 15% of the workforce that is as filed for unemployment. And nationwide, those numbers are 22 million people so far that have applied for unemployment benefits. Now, the Payment Protection Plan, which was very welcomed by small businesses, the first $250 billion has all but evaporated, and banks want more dollars to help small businesses stay afloat and keep their employees employed. The White House is working with Congress for another $250 billion for a second round of PPP, and banks are talking about the need for an additional $1 trillion. That $250 billion will evaporate in a matter of days as well. And we know also that there's a lot of small businesses that are still struggling to get their checks, to get their applications processed. There was lots of glitches as this program rolled out. Difficult, even if it was the best laid plans, difficult because there's so much demand by so many small businesses that have great need for the additional dollars to keep their businesses open. We also know that there's a lot of individuals that are still trying to find unemployment, file for unemployment benefits that just can't get through because their lines are so jammed. So the actual numbers may be substantially higher than what we see. We see on a national levels, week by week, the numbers are beginning to cool off, but that may not be an accurate representation of actually what's taking place. So with that background, I'd like to turn it over first to Supervisor Brandau about what you see, how you see the county rolling back out or re-entering the workforce, what obstacles you see, challenges that the county is facing, and what we can do to help as citizens, and where the shortfalls are going to come in on the county side. Supervisor.
Perfect. Well, first, Darius, I'd like to thank you and GV Wire for hosting this conversation. You get a lot of great information out to the community. I read almost every article you guys put up. Usually connect with you I'll see an article on Twitter and then end up reading it. So I appreciate the conversation today. Yeah, the numbers that you went over for unemployment are very sobering. We've got a history in the Central Valley of California of kind of lagging behind the rest of the nation and actually lagging behind the rest of our own state when it comes to re-engaging. I know when we came through the recession of 2008, 2009, it took several years for the Central Valley to catch up to the rest of the state and the rest of the nation. So that's a little additional hurdle that we always seem to have to cover here in the Central Valley. So that's very worrisome to me. I've been on the phone with a number of business owners, and particularly small business owners, the last couple of days. Most of them have not yet even been able to engage the system to begin getting some of the resources that are available to them. I'm glad that the governor yesterday talked about the EDD resources being made available 24/7. It looks like we need that kind of concept to extend to some of the other resources. So, I'm a small business owner, and my little business, carpet cleaning company, is pretty quiet right now. I'm able to do a few small commercial jobs where there's nobody in the building and they have the demand to keep the building real clean for when customers come in. In particular, an example is I cleaned for a bank last week. But my residential customers are all, of course, sheltering in place, and so they're not cleaning carpet. They're not doing a lot of services that we normally see. So I've been talking to a lot of service-related business owners and other types of small business owners, and most of them have had a very difficult time even engaging the government and sometimes even the banks that they rely upon to help them in the process. Bigger businesses seem to have more resources. Either they have personnel on staff that work for them, or they can pay a third party to go out and get some of this stuff done for them. I'm nervous about the small businesses that operate in Fresno County. And so I hope in the days ahead, real quickly, that some of these systems can come online quicker and a little bit more easier to manage for folks that don't do this all the time. So I'm very concerned. The numbers you talked about, the unemployment numbers to me, indicate that there is a tidal wave of financial, I don't know if I want to say the word damage, but financial damage that's already building. We've kind of got the tidal wave of COVID-19. We kind of see where that's at. I think next week is supposed to be projected to be the peak week in Fresno and Fresno County and the Central Valley, based on a model our public health officers using. We should see our peak there. So we know what that wave looks like. It's the wave of economic impact that I'm, quite frankly, more concerned about it, at this point. We're doing a lot on COVID-19 here at the county level. I know the community is doing a great job, but it's keeping our eyes on the economic tidal wave that's seeming to be building. So very concerned.
Great points, Supervisor. I want to turn that over to Councilmember Karbassi for opening comments.
Sure. Thank you, Darius and GV Wire. The supervisor is right. You guys have been constantly covering COVID, the impact on the community on the health level, healthcare level. Now we're talking about, the tax-based level and the impact it's going to have on residents and the services they receive. So I am grateful to you for doing that and being a great source of information for the greater Fresno community. So these numbers are really scary when you look at unemployment. Like Supervisor Brandau, my family has a small business. Now he's in the carpet cleaning business. We're in the rug selling business. So there is some similarity there. Needless to say, we're all impacted, and we can uniquely understand the impact it has to a lot of folks and on Main Street. Now these numbers are really scary, but it's a little bit artificial, because what caused it was COVID-19. It wasn't like there was a Great Depression or something in the economy that was far worse that led to this. So I want us to look at that with caution, and also to understand that as we dole out benefits, because there is going to be a cost to taxpayers ultimately, whether it's from the state or it's from the federal government. Those numbers are also inflated because there are a lot of folks that qualify for pandemic unemployment assistance. Now, unfortunately, the federal government through the CARES Act did that to provide relief to folks. But what ended up happening was we still have small business owners and gig workers, people that are 1099 workers that can't get the help they need because the EDD didn't really move fast enough. And I know they're heavily impacted, but these are the people that had such an unexpected drop in income because we had to shut them down, and they're suffering. And meanwhile, I know they're going to eventually get compensated, but we haven't really relieved that anxiety. That's a very unfortunate fact. I'm encouraged by what the governor said yesterday. It looks like they're going to get on that and make it a priority. But the thing about these gig workers and these small business owners, small business is the #1 employer in America. These are people that constantly give back to our economy and support our tax base. We have to be very careful with the limited resources we're injecting into the economy. We need to make sure it goes to folks that are actually impacted by COVID-19. We're basically protecting our investment. It's part of the reason why in the city of Fresno, we created the Save Our Small Businesses Act. It's a loan to grant program at $5,000 or $10,000 for businesses in the city of Fresno. Our goal was, we know we had to shut you down. It was really difficult to do that. We want to take responsibility. So we're going to try and give you some money to tide you over because we want you to be in business a year from now. So it's really scary, but the reality is that we have the greatest economy in the world. And as long as we're responsible to our response to this, we can protect our economy. And I think we're going to come out of this very strong.
It's a great point, Council Member. Let me talk about revenue. Where you, as businesses have begun to shut down starting a few weeks ago. I mean, most of us at GB Wire and Granville Homes are shelter in place. We're working from our homes. It's been very complicated, but safety is most important, and safety is first for us. But what do you see happening as restaurants have shut down, which has really decimated that industry, and their staff and their employees are unemployed? How has that impacted county budgets and city budgets? Can you opine on that? And what is that doing to services made available from the county and the city? Let's start with you, Supervisor Brandau.
Yeah, so, and the answer is going to be a little bit different for both myself and Councilman Karbassi because of the way that tax dollars come into our government agencies. So in the county, most of our tax dollars come into our general fund portion, at least, and I'll get to the direct stuff that comes from California in a minute. But the stuff that comes in from property taxes is what pays for the bulk of our general fund expenditures. So we've got some good news, but there's still a little cause for concern on property taxes. So let me talk about that real quick. I had a conversation in preparation for this conversation we're having with you. I had a conversation with Oscar Garcia. He is our tax collector for Fresno County. And as you know, property tax deadline was April 10th. We're past that now. And we've collected about 95.3% of the property taxes to be collected. That leaves about 4.7%, but that 4.7% is still the equivalent of $50 million. So a $50 million hit to our general fund would be real tragic. Now, Oscar Garcia is telling me, that number, some people are going to pay late. We're going to catch up some of that number. We don't know what the final outcome will be, but we are going to be able to collect most of our property taxes that will allow us to move forward with the general fund portion of our budget. Before I move off of property taxes real quick, let me add that many in the community, Darius and Mike, have been calling supervisors and asking, what about late fees and fines that are usually put in place on property taxes if you pay late? And we've really taken a close look at what we can do here. Legally, there's a couple of hurdles that stop us from waiving fees, or waiving fines, I guess I should say, that are related to late payment of property tax. So there's some legal hurdles, and our goal is to get past those legal hurdles. So if somebody's paying their property tax late due to coronavirus, a hardship, we want to be able to waive or completely forgive that late penalty. We need the governor or the state legislature to act on that and allow us to do that. They've got to make a decision there, and it would be as easy as the governor making an executive order and declaring that COVID-19 qualifies for a hardship that we can waive these late fees. There's been some consternation because other counties have moved forward, not waiting for that. But our legal experts, including the California, or CSAC, which runs California counties, kind of an association, their legal opinion is we need to wait for the governor to declare, or the state legislature. So I wanted to clear that up. But we get most of our money on property taxes. A good chunk of that has come in. The county is less reliant upon sales tax. You just mentioned, Darius, businesses not operating, restaurants not generating as much revenue. A lot of that income is sales tax, and that's gonna impact my colleague over at the city more than it will myself at the county. And before Mike talks about that, there are other monies that come to the county directly from the state. They do not go into our general fund portion of our budget. They go directly into the departments to be impacted. For instance, well, I should say that Fresno County government exists to serve as a pass-through agency to get people services they need. Like I said, on the Fresno Madera Association for Aging. So our aging population, the elderly, they need resources. There's some of our elderly that need to receive meals daily. That is an impact that comes directly from the state of California. We don't make a determination about how much money goes there. That's directed from the state. What we're here, and there's many hundreds of examples like that. Social services, CalFresh program, which basically used to be called welfare. A lot of that management comes directly from Sacramento into the department directly. And we're expecting the amount of money that we've had to use to address COVID-19, we're expecting that the state is going to have to trim back the money that goes directly for these services. So while we won't see a major hit on our property taxes, we'll see some hit, but we're actually a little bit more concerned about the monies that come in directly from the state into these county departments to serve directly our community. And so that's where our concern lies.
Thank you, Supervisor. Councilmember Karbassi, your comments?
Sure. Yeah, so the income that we use in our general fund, that's what pays for our road maintenance, our police and firefighters, our park maintenance, the things that people see every day in government. The biggest income to that fund is property tax revenue, but sales tax is a close second. And because the economy was doing so well, we were getting quite a lot of sales tax. Now, our fiscal year is different. I mean, for those of you that file taxes at home, it's January to December. Our fiscal year will expire at the end of June. July 1st is the first day of the next fiscal year. So this fiscal year, we're going to feel an impact. Imagine if we have a 5% loss in income from this revenue we're talking about, that's going to be about $10 million right there. So just from this income source that we expect to lose, that's going to be sales tax revenue, TOT tax, the transient occupancy tax for people staying in hotels, because again, that's not happening a whole lot right now. And the fortunate thing, there's a couple of good things happening though. Number one is the federal government has a coronavirus relief fund that cities across the country with over 500,000 in population can apply for direct stimulus. And the deadline's tomorrow. The city of Fresno is applying for that funding. That'll help us weather the storm to pay for all the extra costs as a result of COVID-19. But what's really important to me, if we're in a state of emergency, if you're staying at home, you rely on your city providing the services that you've earned as a taxpayer. You fund those services. Things like garbage collection. If you call the police department and getting help, they've been absolutely amazing. Our fire department, they've had a lot of structure fires recently, and they do a lot of medical aid help, and they've been just phenomenal in this process. We want to maintain those services. The other thing Fresno has going for it, and I'm going to compliment Mayor Lee Brandau on this, because as a council member, this was a priority for him. We have a really healthy reserve fund. The purpose of that fund, we had a recession that hurt economies all across the country, including the city of Fresno. We had to cut back services. This reserve is going to help us to avoid, it's for a rainy day. This is going to be a rainy day. And that way we can maintain those quality services for residents. So while you're at home relying on services, we can maintain those services for you. So, it could be a lot worse. Fresno is in much better shape than a lot of municipalities, fortunately. And our goal is to maintain those core services you rely on and have minimal impact to the taxpayers. We're going to have to maybe tighten the belt a little bit, and that's fine. But I think the impact we're going to have here is a lot less than other places.
Great point, Council Member. There's several comments about social distancing. One comment that, hey, we really appreciate the social distancing laws in the city of Fresno because so many folks were coming into their store. And this could create more, not flat, increase the rise of the curve. But then there's other comments that says, hey, how will social distancing, how long do you plan on prolonging social distancing and its potential negative impacts and shelter, along with shelter in place and potential negative impacts on the economy, the local economy. Councilman Karbassi, let me start with you and then go to Supervisor.
I apologize, it cut out a little bit. Can you ask your question quickly one more time?
There's two comments, several comments actually. One person that says, yeah, we're grateful for the social distancing and the shelter in place that the city of Fresno has come up with, keeping us safer. But then the other comments are, how much longer do you see that happening, being prolonged in the city of Fresno? We know May 6th right now is the deadline or is the cutoff. and hopefully will not get extended, but do you see that getting extended, or under what circumstances will you see that getting extended, and its potential impacts on the local economy?
Well, I think obviously the longer that we're shut down, the greater the impact to our local economy. And there's really no question about that. I'm eager, and I think that the city is eager to open our businesses up and our economy up as fast as we can, but we have to be responsible about it. Things are looking really good in California. Unfortunately, today in New York, you're going to see the 10,000th death from coronavirus. That's tragic. In California, our numbers are at about 861 as of yesterday. So, I know the peak hasn't hit yet, but we're doing really good. The whole point of flattening the curve was preventing our hospitals from being overburdened, because, years ago there was talk about death panels and all that kind of thing. Well, what happened in Italy is you had people that could have gotten hospital care. We're not saying they would have survived, but when you're on a ventilator, you got a better chance than not. And basically in triage, they were determined we can't care for them because we don't have enough beds or ventilators, and those people died. We don't want that happening in the greatest country in the world with the greatest medical system in the world. So I'm eager to open, but it's got to be done responsibly. And I know businesses are hurting really, really bad. It's not taken lightly. These emergency powers are a very big deal. They shouldn't be abused. They should be done respectfully. But I think that for me, I'm not a medical professional, but we're relying on medical professionals. But until we have better testing, our sample is really weak. About 30% of people out there that have coronavirus are asymptomatic. So they're carrying it. So if we don't have social distancing, if we open everything up again, who knows if this is going to spike again? And we're trying to avoid that. If we're take a little bit of sacrifice in the front end right now, we may avoid having to shut down the economy later on. Because imagine, we've done it now and people are on board. If we open up too quickly and we shut down the economy again, that's going to have a really negative effect and kill consumer confidence in this country.
That's a great point, Councilmember. Supervisor Brandau, comments on social distancing, shelter in place from a county perspective?
Yeah, the county of Fresno is under the general shelter in place that was mandated by the governor. So we don't have an additional shelter in place like the city of Fresno does. So we have we have probably a little bit more flexibility. But in general, the way I'd like to answer that question, Darius, is I believe that we are ready to open up major portions of our economy and still remain committed to social distancing. I like to use an example that applies to me perfectly, but it's an example that could be extrapolated for dozens, if not hundreds of types of businesses. A furniture store. I need to buy some pieces of furniture. Well, I'm not the kind of guy that just can go do that online, having never sat in a couch before. I need to see what that couch feels like when I sit in it. I believe we can open up furniture stores and allow them to operate under social distancing, much like we do with banks, grocery stores, hardware stores like Lowe's and Home Depot. Across the street from Lowe's in my district and Mike's district is Fashion Furniture. And there's many other furniture stores that this would apply to. Why couldn't they open up and still follow the CDC guidelines on social distancing, maybe cut their occupancy in half of what it would normally be, put a queue outside of the store so you make sure that if your square footage only allows for 50 customers or 25 customers, people get in a queue. We've seen that at other businesses. And inside the store, of course, people could wear masks and gloves and all the types of things that we see in other services. I believe we're ready to do that. I hear an outcry for that in our community and in the business world. I believe that people want to move forward, understanding that there's still going to be some responsibilities. I liked what the governor said about, instead of a light switch, consider it being more like a dimmer, where you can you not just flip on everything and expect it to be as it was in the first week of February, but to aggressively use that dimmer to turn on the bright light of our economy and get people back to work. So I believe that can happen soon. I think that could apply to a lot of businesses. I've talked a lot about small business, but if you think of a hairdresser, somebody who has a hair and nail salon or something like that, these people have been heavily impacted. They would be willing, and I've spoken to many of them, they'd be willing to open their business by appointment only, where in the past they might have 5 or 7 people in the lobby chit-chatting and waiting for their turn for their haircut or their nails to be done. Why couldn't they do it by appointment only and allow one customer in the room at a time and set it by, you know, at 12 noon, you have a customer, at 1:30, you have a different customer. So I think the business community is fully capable of honoring the CDC guidelines and yet getting back to work. That would be a goal of mine.
Great point. Thank you. I'm going to come back to Councilmember Karbassi about rolling back out and getting under what conditions do you see again the economy rolling back out, and then there are several questions on homeless issues that I want to get to, and how do we deal with our homeless? How do they shelter in place from preventing the spread and not getting infected themselves? Let me just, before we do that, let me just go over some stats. So Fresno County, we're population close to 1 million. We have 265 confirmed cases and 7 deaths and a little over 60 that have recovered. So 1% of the population is roughly 10,000. 0.1% is 1,000. So we're 1/4 of 0.1% that have been confirmed cases. Now we know testing has been an issue, and we haven't had a chance to do mass testing, so those numbers will probably go up as number of test kits become available. But how do you balance that? Supervisor, you just talked about, you want to roll back out and get businesses partially open. It's not going to be a 100% back on switch. How do we balance that? Well, knowing first of all the number of cases are really low in Fresno County, which is really good for us as a county. Obviously, 1 death is too many deaths. But how do we balance that, knowing that we aggressively went after social distancing and shelter in place? And if we hadn't done that, could those numbers have been substantially higher? And I want to actually get Councilmember Karbassi's perspective on this first, and then also I want to roll right out of that and into homeless issues. How do we deal with our homeless population? Councilmember first, and then Supervisor. Okay,
so first off, if there's ever an excuse for hairdressers to open, this is the excuse right here. The trouble, though, we actually discussed that issue because they're small business owners, they're impacted. Can they socially distance? Even if you wear a mask, you're right next to somebody. Even if the client wears a mask, you have bands around your head. You're going to have to get around that. COVID can live on surfaces. There's a lot of things out there that it's like the flu, or the cure is worse than the virus. And I want to explain where I'm coming from as a decision maker now. Last year at this time, I was just a small business owner, and I would be on the boat of saying, hey, look, this economy is hurting, we need to open. But now, wearing the hat of a council member, I have a responsibility to make a decision. In this case, it's about public health. We don't have a lot of public health decisions that happen at the city level. But now, let's talk about some numbers that we're looking at. So when you look at the fact that, yes, the city of Fresno has its own shelter-in-place order. Even if we remove that, we are still bound like the county by the governor's order. Ours has a deadline. I don't believe the state's does. If things improve earlier, I'm confident we'll take that away and open businesses up. But here's the dilemma. Right now, the fatality rate in Fresno County is about 2.79% of those that are infected with the virus that actually die. Tulare is 4.26%. Madera is 6.06%. I believe that our shelter-in-place order and how we are a bit more restrictive and we're a bit more serious has actually saved lives, because a majority of the population in the county lives in the city of Fresno. So going back on another issue that's important, you talked about furniture stores, and Supervisor's right. Why can't all those businesses open? They can socially distance, they can be responsible. And I want to do that. Things are looking really good but the president said we're at war. I believe we are at war. You know, when 9/11 hit in New York, they lost about 2,753 lives in ground zero. They've lost 10,000 lives from this. This is a war with a virus. It's something that we can't see. And we don't want that to happen here. We took very aggressive, proactive measures, and the numbers are coming down. The dilemma that we have in the city of Fresno is the more aggressive we are, the more responsible we are, the more lives we save, the less urgency people are going to feel to need to stay in shelter in place. If we did nothing, I'm convinced those numbers would have been staggering, because this is not a flu. This is a different kind of virus. It's a virus, and that's about it. The reason why they call it the novel coronavirus is because it is new. We don't know a whole lot about it. True, we don't have a vaccine, and I'm really hoping that with our American ingenuity, we're going to get there, and then we're going to share that information with the world and protect other people. But, you know, I need to be more confident that we can do the three things that were mentioned yesterday in the GV Wire forum with Dr. Sidhu about what do we need? What do doctors, what do medical experts want to see? Because I think that as a policymaker, I'm a politician. I shouldn't be making, I make the decision, but I have to make it on good information. We need three things. We need to test adequately. So we do test in the county, and Fresno County actually has a lot more testing than other places in Central California, but our sample size is really small. We need to be able to track adequately these numbers and treat adequately. I'm confident that our healthcare system, although we can always use more personal protective equipment for our frontline responders, I think we're getting there. We're getting there to where if there's a surge, we can handle it. But I'm not of the opinion like Representative Hollingsworth in Indiana said that he's perfectly okay opening up the economy and people are going to die, and that's okay because the solution is worse than the cure. This is a very serious matter. And look, there's a family in Firebaugh. They lost two loved ones. It was a husband and a wife, and they've been married for a long time. I don't want that to be my family. I don't want it to be my dad who's 78. And yet we're pretty aggressive on it. But the numbers show that our being aggressive is working. And I think that we're getting really close to opening up, but we don't want to walk off the battlefield too early and be overrun by this virus.
That's a great point. One of the concerns that California has, Dr. Fauci has talked about multiple times, is the second wave that could come that we talked about earlier. If businesses and consumers see a second wave, they could potentially lose confidence in the economy and want to shelter in place voluntarily for much longer periods of time. Councilman, Supervisor Brandau, any comments before we go to the next topic?
Yeah, several comments. I think Dr. Fauci needs to stay in his own lane, for one thing. I think that, he's connected to the medical pandemic. And I don't think he should be making a lot of comments about the economy. And quite frankly, he's been wrong a lot about his predictions for the medical impacts of coronavirus. So I'm a little bit nervous about the medical community dictating to the business community exactly everything about the parameters of firing the economy back up. Our own public health officer, Dr. Vora, which Darius, GV Wire, you've been a part of those interviews many times, has said that the single biggest factor is the social distancing of 6 feet apart. And of course, the other factors play a role as well. So I don't think, I for sure am not dismissing that 6 feet apart rule or the CDC guidelines. I'm talking about if those are the important factors, let's move the economy forward with those factors still in place. So I don't know what Hollingsworth is talking about. If he's just talking about the business as usual, I can't comment on that. I would disagree with that. But I do believe that we're fully capable of firing up the economy with these factors still in place. And I will say that Governor Newsom talked about the dimmer switch, and I'm fully able to appreciate that analogy rather than a light switch, which is on or off. I'm fully capable of agreeing with the dimmer switch approach if we're moving that dimmer switch and we're opening the bright light of the economy as fast as possible. And to Councilmember Karbassi's comment about if we have experience a downturn, this is what the governor said, then we're able to dial back the dimmer switch. So I think we have the freedom to address some of these concerns. I totally appreciate it. I would like, Darius, if I could share a graph that I've prepared for this conversation. Can I? May I?
Please.
Okay. Let's see here. Let me share my screen real quick. Now, this is a bar graph that we're very familiar with. This is Fresno County, folks, and this is the COVID cases we've had since March 1st. And you can see that this line is going upward. And if you look at this graph, you go, well, this is very concerning. Now, we do have good news. Our model is predicting that we're getting close to our peak. We'll know this in about a week if we've gone to the peak or we start to go over the peak. That would be fantastic. So this is a graph that we're very familiar with the number of folks who have died and also the positive cases here in Fresno County. I want to show you another graph. This graph is the same information on the total, comparing to the total population of Fresno County. And we're roughly saying we have about 1.2 million residents in Fresno County. This is the same information. You don't see the little bars. They're down there. But the line is so flat that it's statistically insignificant. So I think when we have this conversation going forward, we need to pay attention to the coronavirus, which I believe we've done a very good job at. And I'm willing to give kudos to those who have made sure that we've done that. But we have, it's still very minimal impact upon the population. Now, I believe the social distancing is great. The shelter in place has been doable, but I think we need to get the economy fired back up, and I think we're capable of doing that, acknowledging the social distancing. I am very concerned about the ongoing impacts, as you mentioned when we opened up our conversation about unemployment, the impacts of small businesses, the impact of the survivability of businesses in Fresno County. And I would also like to add that, we are not New York City. We're not even Los Angeles or San Francisco. We're in the Central Valley. And Darius, when we were working on City of Fresno's general plan, one of my concerns was constantly about density. And we are not dense as those massive cities. And maybe that is also part of the reason we haven't experienced the same type of percentages we've seen there. If I was a supervisor that my district was in the city of New York or the county of Los Angeles, I would have a slightly modified view of what I'm presenting today. But I'm not. I'm a supervisor in Fresno County. I acknowledge there's been some impact to some families, and I regret that, and we're working to help. But we've got a lot of families impacted in Fresno County by shutting down the economy. So that's where my concerns lie.
Great points, Supervisor. Before I turn it over to Council Member, so yes, we don't have international travel or limited international travel directly out of Fresno. That's helped us in this case. And we don't have the densities and the mass transit that New York City or San Francisco has. So if you're in San Francisco or New York City, one of the only ways you can get to work is get on mass transit, whether it's the underground or whatever it may be. And so you're around a lot of people. And of course, New York City has a lot of international travel from all over the world and especially from Europe. So combination of a lot of those things and the high density that New York City has, they've probably contributed to the aggressive growth of COVID cases. But the good news, again, New York City is that their curve is flattening, and it looks like there's opportunities to get everybody treated. And with that, I want to get your comments, Councilmember Karbassi, on mass transit and densities. There's a general plan committee that's in progress, as you well know, to look at our general plan. We don't need to opine on that today, but any comments on mass transit in this COVID era and higher density or intensification of density?
Sure. Real quick, yeah. Okay, so real quick, regarding the graphs, I think it really is important to have really good data. Looking at the supervisor's graph, the trouble I have with that graph is that it's in 200,000 increments. So yeah, you're not going to see much on there because we've only had just over 3,674 tests conducted by the Department of Public Health and others in Fresno County. So you're not going to see, in a county of almost 1 million people, so you're not going to see a lot on there. And like we talked about, at least 30% of the people that carry it are asymptomatic carriers. It would be a lot easier for me and for other policymakers to have, and we just don't have the capability, but to have more testing and rapid testing so that we can make, instead of shooting in the dark, we can make a more accurate assessment of what's going on the ground. That's one of our biggest hindrances right now. And if we can do that, that'll be great. Now talking about, but you know, the supervisor's also right about the governor. It would be really great because, yep, when it comes to counties, the 11th county in terms of concentration of cases is LA County. The remainder, most of them are in New York. It would be really great if Fresno's response can be proportional to the local statistics, the numbers on the ground. Because if he's too restrictive, and if we have to wait to be like LA and San Francisco to open, that's not going to work, and that's really going to cripple our economy. So it would be great if we can go based on local metrics, and whether it's a light switch or a dimmer switch, gradually open things up, following some of the recommendations the supervisor made to socially distance and be responsible. That's one thing I'm hoping the governor is going to actually do. Now, talking about mass transit, there's another element to that. So the other element is this is going to hit our tax base really hard. And the tax base is so important to people because if you want your roads fixed, if you want the police and fire departments funded, if you want your parks funded, that's all general fund money, property tax, sales tax revenue. So your general plan has a lot to do with property and sales tax, especially property tax. Our current general plan, not to get in the weeds too much, there's 17 points in the general plan. Number 16 is promoting the public's health and safety. I think it's the shortest of all the objectives. I want to see that move to number 1 moving forward. And we're going to have to talk about density because we talk about VMTs and vehicle miles traveled, and we can get into that, but that quest has actually resulted in more risk when it comes to a COVID-19 situation because the doctor yesterday, I think, Dr. Sidhu talked about living in New York, and we've had a staggering number of transit workers that have died from COVID-19 by just doing their job and trying to provide service for people. I think it's over 50 people, just transit workers that have died, which is terrible. So moving forward, this is going to have to be a factor in our general plan. I'm more of a market-driven person. I want the market to drive the plan, but we're also going to have to put the public health element in that too.
Great points, Council Member. I want to get into the subject of homeless and how do we deal with our homeless and shelter-in-place funding for the homeless. Several questions have come up on the screen on, how do we address the issues of homeless in this crisis? Supervisor, can we start with you?
Yeah, really quickly. My colleague Nathan Maxig has done a great job leading Fresno County in this regard. We're mostly taking dollars from the state. The governor has set aside a large number of tax dollars to address the homeless situation. And the dollars come to the county, and we are allowed to work within a framework to address our homeless. Mostly it is to contract with providers to oversee care of the homeless. Now we have people inside of that world, the nonprofit world, that are going out and making contact with the homeless on the streets and asking them to come into shelter during this time. And we've got some additional shelter available. Just several weeks ago, I believe it was about 2 weeks ago, the Board of Supervisors passed, and then the City Council passed as well, an agreement to create about 300 new beds for people to come in off the street in the homeless world. And the great news is those beds were filled. So more people are coming in. That's great. That's fantastic. But the downside is there's many more beds needed if we want to bring even more people in off the street. We're working together with City Council again to take the strategy to the next level, which now seems like it may not, but it looks like the conversation is around opening up hotel rooms, leasing hotel rooms from some of our hotel people who are quite frankly shut down. And so it might be a good time to talk about hotels. And so we're working with our partners to address that. And I think there'll be some more bed space additional. I would like to add, Darius, before we turn it over to Mike, and Mike as a city councilman has probably a lot more to say about the homeless. But I see a silver lining in the clouds when it deals with the homeless. Right now, for the first time in many years, we have a whole new group of homeless people because they're scared of COVID-19 or for whatever reason, they're coming in to get services that they've been rejecting for years. And so I'm hoping if there is a silver lining, some of these folks will now get on their proper medications if necessary, or off of addictions if necessary, and return to a more normal mindset. And maybe that in that better mindset, maybe they'll be able to get the continued services they need to get their to get back and become a real helpful member of society. And so I do see a silver lining that I'm looking for. It'd be fantastic if once COVID-19 was over with, we were able to say, wasn't it great that X number percentage of homeless were able to get healthier because they were fewer hours out on the street where there's drugs and some of these other things out there that are no longer available to them. So I see a silver lining, and I'm looking forward to continue to work with the city of Fresno to see what more we can do for our homeless population.
Nancy's follow-up question was, okay, 300 beds is just a drop in the bucket. Where are the dollars from the state? Any more dollars coming from the state, to convert motel rooms for homeless? Any information on that, Supervisor?
The latest batch of dollars from the state came to the city of Fresno. I believe it's about 2.2 million. Mike can probably speak to that more clearly. So we received in March, we received a chunk of money from the state to deal with COVID homeless that were in threat of being a victim of COVID-19. And so we've got some facilities up and running to completely address those folks. I understand what Nancy's saying. 300 beds is not going to change the world of homelessness. And that's why we have to continue with the next strategy. And there's been talks behind the scenes on how to get that delivered, I hope, as soon as possible. So those talks will continue. The latest batch of dollars has gone to the city of Fresno. I'll let Mike talk about that. And then what we're hearing from the governor is that there'll be continued funding for helping out our homeless population across the state of California.
Councilmember?
Yeah. So one thing I'm going to piggyback off of what the supervisor said is to compliment Supervisor Maxick and the board. The relationship with the board and the council on this issue of homelessness is really strong and working together and pooling our resources together. I'm very encouraged by that, and I want to continue that because it's not just a problem for Fresno, it's really a regional problem for all of us. Now, there are other victims of homelessness, like domestic violence victims. We have shelter-in-place orders. There are some statistics. I think the UN Secretary General recently talked about worldwide how domestic violence is increasing. So if anyone's listening and you're willing to make a donation, please donate to the Marjorie Mason Center. Please help them out because they cater to a very different kind of homeless population. And one thing we want to make sure doesn't happen during this crisis is a greater inflow to homelessness. The city did pass a moratorium on evictions for commercial and residential tenants. I mean, the courts are closed, so really that's more of a barrier than anything. But we wanted to make sure that we don't result in having more people that are homeless. But the other big thing is to really make sure the federal and state government get aid to us, the local level, as fast as they can. You talked about Triple P earlier, and it's great that we have this program, and the purpose is to reduce anxiety. But if we don't get that money to folks in fast enough time, or the pandemic unemployment assistance to folks that are truly affected by COVID-19. Because remember, we have limited resources. So it should go to the people that are truly affected. If we don't do that, then we didn't really relieve any anxiety. I mean, people are going to be suffering and they're going to be pushing for the economy to open faster. So I think the federal government and the state government need to really get their act together when it comes to this. And I know we're overwhelmed, we're all scrambling, But look, all of us, it's all hands on deck. I mean, Supervisor Brandau, when he's not at the office, he's going around talking to businesses and trying to get assistance information to them. We talked about that, Steve. I'm going around. I created that Fresno COVID help website for employees and for businesses to get the help they need. But if they won't expect local governments to respond, we need to make sure they get those resources to us faster, because Nancy's right. It's 300 beds. But we can't say it's only 300 beds and let's not keep moving. It's 300 beds, 300 people that can get the help they need. We want it to be more, and we're going to work as fast as we can. But we are really dependent on the federal government making sure they get that money to us. But the fortunate thing is we've got a really positive relationship with the county, so we can deliver that.
Fresno County has stopped the sweeps. Has the city of Fresno still doing the homeless sweeps? Is that still happening?
I'm going to leave that question to Chief Hall. I don't want to speak for the police department. That's not been something the council's been faced with. We haven't made a decision or a vote on that matter.
Got it. Okay. Another question came in regarding mass transit. And it says basically during this COVID-19 world, state of California is pushing bus rapid transit and van pooling throughout the state. How will that impact? What are your thoughts on mass transit? We talked about that briefly earlier. And how will the city and the county deal with mass transit, enforcing mass transit, van pooling, carpooling on the residents going forward? There's a new state law that is going into effect July 1st that has to do with vehicle mile traveled that all counties have to basically enforce. Any thoughts on that, council member? And then we'll go to Supervisor.
Sure. I think that COVID-19 has been a wake-up call and a game changer. It's something that, we weren't expecting. And having a state of emergency, I think that we need to really evaluate our priorities. I mean, a lot of deadlines, we had certain deadlines here, like we had a general plan review deadline. We're going to have to extend that as a result of the COVID-19 outbreak because people can't meet. So I would hope at the very least they would extend that, but also give us more flexibility on that, because before we had this COVID-19, we were thinking, oh, it's the right thing to do and we're going to have mass transit, it's better for the environment. But if you're dead, the environment won't matter to you. And a pandemic, if it's not COVID-19, it's something else, can cause serious harm. So again, we need to realign our priorities, and I'm hoping that California will do that.
Great point, especially with the advent of electrification of cars and transit. Supervisor, any comments on that?
Yeah, I'd ask a couple questions. Like locally, we still have our fax system running, and I wonder if people are obeying the 6-foot spacing there. I've seen the videos of the subways of New York, so I know they're not doing it there. I'd be very interested to see if we're doing it here. We have some great people in charge of that program, so they're probably doing their best. But you'd ask the question, if that closeness is part of the problem, the close proximity of individuals, then you could even make the case that transit should be suspended during this pandemic, if you really wanted to, especially in a day where you could hail a company. Now, of course, because of the restrictions, Uber and Lyft are all pretty much shut down. So I've got concerns. I never voted for bus rapid transit as a councilman, nor did I support the higher density view of the general plan. And both of those viewpoints have kind of shown themselves to be weak once this pandemic's upon us. But I do think, and I don't suggest we make a lot of changes right now, but I do agree with Councilman Karbassi that when COVID-19 is over with, we need to reevaluate our systems. And before we end our conversation, Darius, I'd like to extend that, because I believe that if there's any silver lining, I mentioned a silver lining dealing with the homeless, but I believe we need to do a top to bottom reevaluation of all of our systems. And that, for me, that includes government, where I work and Mike works. That also deals with business, how we run business. Darius, that's one of your areas of expertise. But the educational system, the medical system, I was shocked how little of this PPE we have available at the outbreak of this of this pandemic. And I'm still shocked today, quite frankly. So I think we need to reevaluate all of our systems. For me, that includes our relationship with China. And so here's an article that I read in preparation for today's conversation. China has more control over your prescription drugs than you may think. Another article, and this one's from healthcare. This is all Health Time. It's all about healthcare in the United States. Here's one from the Washington Times. Wake up call. Chinese control of U.S. pharmaceutical supplies sparks growing concern. I really think it's time for us to take a top to bottom reevaluation of all of our systems. And quite frankly, when it comes to our national security, which means more than a military, it's talking about our healthcare system. It seems to me like we ought to take back control of our medicines and production of our medicine. Many of us are on autoimmune medicine and diabetes medicine. And it's shocking to find out that China manufactures almost all of our medicine, with some in India as well. I believe we need to bring all of that home, and anything related to our national security, food production and medicines, we need to manufacture that and be in control of that right here. And so there's a lot of things that we can learn from this, from transit, which brought forth this little part of the conversation, to density, and then on to our own national security. But we need to do a reevaluation of almost everything.
Great point. And of course, there was an article out today that China is quietly doing nuclear testing again.
I read it.
So yeah, a lot of things to have on the radar screen as this thing unfolds about our relationship with China. Of course, there's been lots of benefit of that, although at the same time, a lot of parts of the economy have been damaged as a result of that. American workers hurt, but our cost of goods has come down substantially because of our relationship with China. So it's a complicated relationship, second most economic powerhouse in the world, and we have to figure out how to address that. Those are great points. One of the questions that keeps coming up, actually, I like Councilmember Brandau to address that as well. But before that, one of the questions that keeps coming up is people that can't get unemployment. Do either one of you two have any suggestions on where they should go, how they should address that? If there's folks that just can't get through, they're unemployed, and they just cannot get through to get their check, get their unemployment filed, etc. Any thoughts on that, Councilmember?
Yeah, if I can chime in, if you go to FresnoCOVIDHelp.com, under the news section, there's a link to the governor's statement yesterday, where they're going to dedicate more resources starting in about a week, specifically for people that are gig workers, small business owners that don't normally qualify for unemployment to get the help they need. I wish it was done. It should have been done a week ago. I mean, I get that. We're way too late, but at the very least, they will retroactively provide funding to folks. And that way you can get through. But the website, if you click on the employees tab, it also has phone numbers and links to apply for unemployment online. When you're applying, sometimes it'll crash, hit refresh, and keep going. Unfortunately, this is where we are right now, but we got to have a little bit more grit and determination to get the resources we need, because the system is really overwhelmed right now. But there's more coming on the way. And I get the anxiety people feel. It's really frustrating. I'm sure if Steve and I were in Sacramento, we'd be, really putting the fuel to the fire, keeping them from not getting their act together, the EDD.
Great point. Any comments on manufacturing here locally, especially our pharmaceuticals, our PPEs, et cetera, and not being so reliant on China and India?
Well, if I can add one thing about the bus system, by the way, just so you know, we actually are doing social distancing on the bus. It's not like what's happening in New York. Some people have to wait longer for a bus because there's only so many spaces available. There are seats that are X'd out. You can't sit there. We also want to ensure our bus drivers are safe. We disinfect the buses. It's not, I understand there's concerns. We don't disinfect enough, but we are disinfecting and we're doing the best we can. And we have to have some level of service, because as people want to go to the grocery store and get essential products, or the pharmacy, they only have the bus in some cases in certain parts of town. So it's important we maintain those services as much as possible, because during the pandemic, people rely on their government as taxpayers to provide the services they pay for.
Unfortunately, one of the comments that came from Jeffrey Lawson, very good point. You can't sterilize the seats every time. Buses get used by a lot of different folks, and so the social distancing works to some extent, but it's really, you have to keep the seats and the door handles, etc., clean and sterilized, and that's almost impossible to do. And of course, the bus drivers themselves are going to be at risk as well. But we also do recognize we have to get people moving from point A to point B. Any closing comments from either one of you before we wrap up? Any final thoughts on any topic? And then closing comments, please.
Yeah, I think it's been a great conversation, Darius. Again, I'm very thankful for you and GV Wire to hold conversations just like this. And I imagine there's many more conversations to come. This isn't going to be over with quickly. And so we're going to be dealing with different components of coronavirus, hypothetically for years. But I would like to say for myself, I think our community has done an outstanding job doing the social distancing and shelter in place. I think when I travel 41, Darius, at nighttime to go from the county building to get home, I just say I could go over 55 if I wanted to, So I think our community has done a great job on the social distancing, shelter in place, and I would like to thank them for continuing that. I do believe, as expressed in some of my answers, that it's time for us to allow business to get back to work, allow churches, some of the other functions of our society to get back to business as usual, or I should say as close to usual as possible, still following guidelines, of course, and following common sense. And so that's where I'm going to be placing my energies in the days ahead, is focusing on being helpful in that regard. And again, very mindful that coronavirus hasn't gone away, and we haven't even reached our peak yet. So we're going to be paying attention to that as well.
Great. Council member, closing comments.
I want to thank GD Wire. I want to thank Darius Assemi for moderating the debate. You are a District 2 resident as well, and we're grateful to have you. I want to thank Supervisor Brandau for providing his useful insight in this conversation. I want to thank especially our first responders. Our police department and fire department have really stepped up. People aren't going on vacation. They're not taking sick time. It's all hands on deck, and crime isn't going down. Unfortunately, there's been a bit of a spike there, and they're just on it. I'm so grateful. Thank you to Captain Farah and the Northwest Police District for protecting District 2. But the biggest thank you has to go to the residents and the businesses in the city of Fresno. You have been extremely patient. You've been taking care of one another. You've been socially distancing. You've been staying at home. I know how hard it is. In my family business, my father is 78 years old. He's never been out home and out of work this long as in his entire life. He's eager to get back to work. And, the fact that you guys are helping to flatten that curve, it may not seem intuitive, but you actually are saving lives. And so the biggest gratitude I have is for having the support, because our government exists at your consent. You give us legitimacy. And when we have your support, that makes a big difference. The economy is going to open. We want the economy to open. We just want to make sure we do it as quickly as possible based on local metrics, but also as responsibly as we can, so that we don't have another spike, and so that we're not risking more lives, so that all our sacrifice won't be in vain. Thank you very much.
Thank you to you both. A couple of quick points. There's fantastic articles on GB Wire. One went up this morning about the impact of face masks and what happens with the virus getting expelled out of our mouths if we are infected. Jim Jacobs did a great job on that. Please tune to gvwire.com or on Facebook. And yes, we have done a great job here in Fresno County by keeping the numbers low. Testing has not been done aggressively yet, and the numbers will probably go up. We should expect that. But we've worked diligently, and it's paying off, ladies and gentlemen. And we're all grateful for that. It has come at a great cost to businesses. We have folks that can't pay their rent, and then there's landlords that are not getting their rent, so they can't pay mortgages. So these are
Right.
you know, exacerbating issues here in the whole country, and especially in Fresno County. As we open the county back up and the city back up responsibly and safely, we're hopeful that those issues will go away. I'm very hopeful that we will not get a second wave. And as we know from GB Wire, there's been some fantastic articles about remedies that are on the way. Remdesivir shows great promise. Early results should be announced mid-May by Gilead Sciences. And the vaccines in Washington State are going into next phases in the coming weeks and months. So there's a lot of exciting news and positive news out there. We just got to make it and make sure the numbers keep coming down as they're projected in Fresno County for us to stay healthy and safe first, and then so that we can rely on a healthier economy going forward. With that, please stay tuned to future programs. We'll have Dr. Sidhu and Dr. Chaudhry and Dr. Sarabi back up early next week. And I hope that these two gentlemen will join us again next week for a second round to discuss some of the questions that we just ran out of time that couldn't get to today. Thank you very much to all of you. This is Darius Assemi with GB Wire. Thank you and have a great rest of the week.